In this part of the course, we're going to talk about firms and their production decisions. And the decision about how much to produce ultimately depends upon the sort of market that the firm is operating in. In this part of the course, we will be focused on what is known as a perfectly competitive market. The first characteristic of a perfectly competitive market is that there are a large number of sellers in the market. Large number of sellers. It is assumed that any one seller is small relative to the whole. So that implies that there is no possible way that one seller could possibly produce enough output to satisfy the demand of the consumers. The second characteristic is that there are a large number of buyers in the market. Similarly, what this means is that any one buyer is small relative to the whole. So it's not going to be possible for any one buyer to be able to influence the market price. And so let's just kind of summarize that. By large, we mean that they are small relative to the market, or small relative to the whole. Any one buyer, any one seller cannot influence the market price. A third characteristic of a competitive market is that each seller provides a similar product. If we're talking about the market for apples, for instance, it's assumed that all of the sellers have similar products. The apples are all very similar. If we're talking about a market for orange juice, all of the producers of orange juice provide a similar quality of product. Market for coffee, everybody's coffee is very similar. Now you can imagine in the real world, this is a strong assumption that the product is similar. Many of us who enjoy coffee would argue that there's a difference between Starbucks coffee and what you're going to find at Cruisers. So the products are not similar. They're differentiated. But in a competitive market, we're working under the assumption that in that particular market, the products are similar. If you relax that assumption, you are no longer in a competitive market. The fourth characteristic of a competitive market is that it is easy to enter into the market. Easy to enter into the market. All that implies is that if you want to start your own business, there are no significant barriers to entry. No significant barriers to entry. Let me write that, then I'll explain what that means. No significant barriers to entry. All that implies is that there is no government action preventing more firms from entering into that industry. You may or may not be aware, for instance, that if a facility wants to sell alcohol, there's generally limits to how many licenses that the state will distribute to restaurants that will allow them to sell alcohol. So there are barriers to entry if you want to be a restaurant that serves alcohol. In this case, there are no significant barriers to entry. It's easy to get into the market. You don't need a license. If you have the know-how and the capital, you can go ahead and do that. When we get into monopolies, we will talk more about different types of barriers to entry, how that can make it difficult for competition to emerge. So these are the characteristics of this market. And it's really important that you learn these characteristics. Because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the different firms will make the decision about how much to produce and what price to charge based on the characteristics of the market in which they are operating. Now, for any of these firms, we're going to assume that their objective is to maximize profit. And in econ, a lot of times we just use the pi sign to represent profit. When you maximize profit, you're looking at maximizing the difference between your total revenue and your total costs. We know what total revenue is. We've seen that several times already, but we're going to spend quite a bit of time here in this section talking about what we mean by total costs. Next thing to consider is that the firms, because they are small relative to the whole, and they are all producing a similar product, and this also goes for your buyers, since they are all similar, what we find is that the firms and the consumers are price takers. Nobody has influence over the price. The price you can charge as a firm is determined in the market. And so let's go ahead and see what that implies. We're going to draw two graphs here. First graph is going to be, let's say, the market for orange juice. And over here, let's just look at a typical orange juice seller, or what we call an orange juice firm. In the market for orange juice, you have many consumers, many producers. So let's go ahead and draw that demand curve. And here's the supply curve for orange juice. And out of the market, we know that it's the interaction of all those consumers and producers that we will get a market price of, let's say, $3 per gallon of orange juice. So we're measuring this in gallons. It's this $3 price that the firm will take as given. So over here, we're going to plot the firm's demand curve. So I'm going to use a little q to represent the firm's output. So this is the total output in the entire orange juice market. This is just the amount of output for one firm in the orange juice market. And I'm just going to put a dollar sign here because we're going to measure all kinds of things here, not only costs and demand and supply, but also things like marginal revenue. The firm takes this $3 price as given, and the fact that they are a price taker means that they will see a perfectly elastic demand curve. So their demand curve, the individual firm sees a demand curve that is perfectly elastic at the market price of $3. And why is that? They're small relative to the whole. If they try to charge more than $3, nobody will buy from them because there's so many other sellers that are willing and able to provide the product at $3. If they try to charge less than $3, there's two things that explain why they wouldn't charge less than $3 or why that's not an equilibrium. First of all is that why, as a profit maximizer, would you charge less than $3 when you can sell as much of this product as you want at the going market price? So that wouldn't be profit maximizing to try to sell less than $3. But if you didn't remember that principle and you decided, well, I'm going to lower my price to, let's say, $2.50 per gallon, you would have so many people lining up outside your door to buy your orange juice because your price is lower, relatively lower than the other producers, that there's no way you could possibly satisfy all their demands. There would be this huge shortage in the market, or huge shortage for you personally, and you would have to raise your price because there's no way, as being small relative to the whole, there's no way that you can satisfy all of the wants of those consumers. So the price would just naturally rise up to $3. A perfectly competitive firm will see a demand curve that is exactly equal to the market price. It's perfectly elastic. Now there's one other concept that I want to introduce at this point, and this is this concept known as marginal revenue. We as economists, we love to think on the margin, and what marginal revenue is the change in total revenue whenever there's a change in output. So let's consider my firm over here. My firm can produce, let's say, 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever, different amounts of orange juice. For each unit they produce, they will get $3 per gallon. Remember, this shows me, doesn't matter if it's the first unit, the second unit, the third unit, the fourth unit, you name it, I will always get $3 per gallon. So in order to calculate marginal revenue, let's first calculate this firm's total revenue. Total revenue, just price times quantity. So that goes 0, 3, 6, 9, and then marginal revenue is the change in total revenue divided by the change in output. So when I produce that first unit, my revenue increases by $3. So by producing the first unit and obviously selling it, my marginal revenue will be $3. What if I produce the second unit? If I produce the second unit, my revenue goes from $3 to $6. In other words, another $3 will be earned if I produce and sell a second unit. And if I do a third unit, my output goes from 2 to 3, so the change in output is 1. My total revenue will go from 6 to 9. I'll earn another $3. And so it'll always be another $3 when I'm in this competitive market. So if I were to plot the marginal revenue curve, and the marginal revenue curve would be this relationship between output and the marginal revenue for that individual unit of output, that marginal revenue curve would lie on top of this demand curve. And so for a perfectly competitive firm, the marginal revenue curve and the demand curves are the same. And it's also unique that the marginal revenue is equal to the market price. And I'm going to go ahead and write that because this is something that we will be revisiting throughout this chapter as well as the additional chapters where we talk about other market structures.